Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Thompson-Coburn Higher Education webinar series. My name is Katie Wendell, and while we kind of wait for everyone to join, I'm going to go ahead and get some housekeeping out of the way. This webinar is CLE accredited, that's continuing legal education, so it's accredited for 1 hour of general CLE credit in California and Illinois, and 1.2 hours of general CLE credit in Missouri. We have created polling questions throughout the presentation that will require you to answer by clicking in your response. That's just so we can track that you've attended and make sure you get that CLE credit. Also, along the bottom of your screen are multiple application widgets you can use. All widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move those around, do whatever you want with those to get the most out of your desktop space. You can also expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows in the top right-hand corner. If you have questions during the webinar, you can feel free to submit those through the Q&A widget down at the bottom. We've allotted some time at the end for questions, and we will get to as many as we can. So feel free to submit those there. Bob would be happy to address those at the end. A copy of today's slide deck and a comparison document is available in the resources list widget. So for anyone who wants to maybe print these out and go ahead and take notes on the slides, I know that's what I always like to do, you can get those now in the resource list widget and go ahead and print those out. You can find additional answers to some common technical issues with the webinar itself located in the help widget at the bottom of your screen. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available within an hour after we are done with the webinar and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. So just hang on to that email and you'll have that link. Also, a survey is available in a widget at the bottom of your screen. So when you are done listening to the webinar, we would really appreciate if you would fill that out. Just take a moment to do so. We value your opinions and appreciate your participation in this course. And we are also always looking for new topics to present on, so we welcome ideas that any of you have and what you would love to hear someone from Thompson-Coburn talk about in our webinar series. So, as I mentioned, my name is Katie Wendell. I am counsel here at Thompson-Coburn, which is a law firm based in St. Louis, but we have several offices all across the country. I am actually based out of DC, so I'm calling today. We're having a snow day here in DC, and you'll see a photo of Aaron Lacey there on the right. So I'm counsel, as I mentioned, and I work closely with Aaron and others here to support our higher education clients. We do a wide range of higher education regulatory work. We also do a lot of corporate work for our higher ed clients and kind of hit the gamut. As you see from our webinar series, we have a lot of different experts across the firm doing tons of interesting work related to higher ed institutions and for those higher ed institutions. So I encourage you to check out the webinar series. As you can see, we're about halfway through the series. So there are several more coming up here in 2019, and you can also access all of our previous webinars by clicking the links in the PDF, I believe, or you can find them on the Thompson-Coburn website. So those are a great resource, and Aaron really packs a ton of information into the webinars, so I highly recommend them. He's also funny and a good entertainer. So yeah, that's him in the picture on the right there. In the cool headphones, looking like a hip podcaster. And as I mentioned, I'm in DC with a snow day, so I am dialing in from home and decidedly do not look like a hip podcaster today. So moving on, let's get right into the presentation. Today you get to hear from Bob Wallace, who is a partner here at Thompson-Coburn. He was actually a former general counsel of the St. Louis Rams. So he has many, many years of experience working with sports teams and convention-related entities. I was talking with him before the podcast, asking him how he felt about the LA Rams, and I know the Super Bowl, brought a lot of people in St. Louis, a lot of strong feelings this year. He said, well, of course, most people don't like the Pats. I don't like the Pats, but I hate the LA Rams even more. So he was rooting the Pats on this year. And he's also worked with universities on matters concerning coaches, facilities, employment agreements for college administrators, and governance and compliance issues. So he has done a wide range of work with universities as well. So I welcome Bob. I thank him so much for joining our higher ed webinar series, and I will turn it over to him. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Katie, for the introduction. You're going to get me in trouble with my Los Angeles Rams friends that still work there. So I wouldn't say I hate them, but I was rooting for the Pats, although having been with the Rams in 2002 Super Bowl, we don't have great feelings for the Pats either. So in St. Louis, this was a very tough Super Bowl. And other than New Orleans, which just boycotted the Super Bowl, I think a lot of people didn't follow the Super Bowl here. And we had a little cartoon that came out, and it said that the most popular show or team during the Super Bowl this year was Netflix. So that says it a lot. But again, thank you for the introduction. As part of my practice, in addition to advising institutions on compliance and governance, I represent coaches and administrators about their contractual relationship with their employer, including those that work in college and university space. Additionally, I've had numerous conversations with and advised several student athletes about the rigors of being a college athlete. In fact, I was one myself, although a very long time ago, but more recently had a son who was a student athlete, so I am very tuned into this challenging opportunity. The time requirements and sacrifice a student athlete has to make are incredible. Even one that comes from a great secondary educational environment, there is no preparing you for the pressures that come with being a top-notch athlete and a full-time student. With games being played on television almost every night of the week, causing the student athlete to be away from campus and classes, the exposure, glamour, and dollars produced in college athletics germinate a field ripe for problems and scandals. As we are so aware, gaining an edge to win or cheating has all too often been a common storyline. So I thought almost a year and a half after the FBI arrested and charged several coaches and people affiliated with college basketball, and a little less than 1 year from a full report and recommendations from the prestigious commission headed by former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, this would be a good time to look back at the current state of college basketball and what has transpired since that important September day, which shook college athletics once again. It is my hope to give you a look back at where we were, what has happened in this space, to look at some of the factors that brought college basketball and to some extent college athletics to the precipice of a crisis, to point out the money involved, where it comes from, who is getting it, and who is not, to look at those who make a living from it, those who dream of making a living from it, and those who attempt to profit off the tremendous and perhaps outsized popularity of sports, and college sports in particular, in our society. This presentation is not an indictment of college athletics, but a look at what led to this crisis, what is attempting to be done to correct it, and what is to be left to be accomplished. I will conclude with some thoughts on what an institution or athletic program might consider so it does not find itself as a lead story on ESPN or a headline in a national or local paper. College basketball and the NCAA Final Four is a great study on the power of college sports. It generates billions of dollars, and schools use this exposure as a window to its campus and a public relations tool to raise money and increase student applications. But it can also ruin a university's reputation, destroy a coach or administrator's career, and cripple a student's chance to get an education or pursue his or her dreams. So, in a playoff of the road from to the Final Four, which is what CBS and Turner Sports use in their advertisements, this program is entitled Let the Road from the Final Four. So let's begin. On September 17th, 2017, which is when we're going to begin our journey, the beginning of the 2017 college football season has just started. It's been almost 6 months since North Carolina, Gonzaga, Oregon, and South Carolina met in Glendale, Arizona for the Division I Final Four to determine the national championship in college basketball. This followed a month-long tournament that has become known as March Madness. The Final Four games were played in the University of Phoenix Stadium, a domed indoor stadium that seats over 75,000 people. Being awarded the Final Four is a feather in the community's cap and is highly competitive. It is sold as an economic boom for the winning city and region. It's a long road. The Final Four games are played on Saturday, so that's the semifinals, and Monday night. And this year, North Carolina defeated Gonzaga 71-65 before 76,168 people to win their sixth national championship. Roy Williams was the head coach at North Carolina, and Mark Few was the head coach at Gonzaga. Frank Martin was the head coach at South Carolina, and Dana Altman at Oregon. There's a lot of money in this, especially for the coaches. Frank Martin, the South Carolina coach, was the highest paid of the four, and he made $2,850,000. He received an additional $735,000 in bonuses. Dana Altman was next. He received $2,700,000 with another possible $575,000 in bonus. And Mark Few from tiny Gonzaga received $1,934,000. National champion coach Roy Williams received $2,182,000 and got a $1 million bonus for winning the national championship. Each of these teams had footwear contracts with Adidas, Nike, including the Jordan brand, or Under Armour. These agreements provided additional money to the school and in some instances to these coaches. It's not reported, and we don't have any figures on whether they received additional money for media shows or general spokesman roles that are not related to the school or to the shoe company, nor how many complimentary tickets a coach might be provided. In most instances, if a coach wants to leave a school for greener pastures, there is a buyout for that opportunity, usually paid for by the school the coach is going to. Only Coach Roy Williams, among these four coaches, has ever won a national championship. He has won 3 while at North Carolina. As I said, there's a lot of money. Duke coach Mike Krzyzewski is the highest paid coach, making almost $9 million a year. His coaching tree is significant. Includes Johnny Dawkins, Mike Bray, Chris Collins, Bobby Hurley, and Steve Wojciechowicz. I only mention these salaries to demonstrate how much and where the money is being spent. College basketball has been lucrative for the general populace of NCAA family. The NCAA was in the midst of a 14-year television deal through 2024 with CBS Sports and Turner Network, and it was for $10.8 billion, or $770 million a year. In April of 2016, it was extended through 2032 for an additional $8.8 billion. Ticket prices for the Final Four games were in excess of 200 per game, and as mentioned, attendance was in excess of 75,000 people. But not everybody's getting paid. Players are not getting paid. Although there is an argument that the players, since the O'Bannon case, O'Bannon versus NCAA, are getting now the full cost of attendance, extra snacks, extra food as scholarship athletes. So that's kind of the status of where we were on September 2017, right when the FBI decided to come down and arrest some people. So as I say, the road gets a little rocky. Here we are in the famous Southern District of New York and the FBI. It's September 2017, and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York alleges a pay-to-play scheme surrounding college coaches, sports agents, and sports apparel representatives, including college and high school players and their families. The scheme basically was that the shoe companies used college coaches to draw players to schools that wore their shoes. Adidas was mainly the named shoe apparel company in this indictment, paying the parents or other influences, which could be college coaches that were recruiting them, could be non-scholastic basketball coaches, which are non-high school coaches, and in a whole separate entity called AAU basketball, to influence the player to choose to go to a school that wore their brand. This was a wide-ranging scandal. Here are some of the schools that were named: Louisville, Miami, Auburn, South Carolina, Oklahoma State, Arizona, and Southern California. Kansas and North Carolina State were added in superseding indictments. Chuck Person from Auburn, Emmanuel Book Richardson, these are assistant coaches at Arizona, Tony Bland at Southern California, Lamont Evans at Oklahoma State, were all charged with crimes including solicitation and accepting bribes. Jim Gatto and Merle Code from Adidas, Christine Dawkins from ASM Sports, Munis Sood, who was a financial advisor, Rasheen Meikle, who was a clothier, and Jonathan Augustine, who was an AAA coach for an AAU program, were also charged. Gatto, Code, Dawkins were later convicted for solicitation and bribery. Also caught in the full court press, named in these indictments, and their names in the local headlines or national headlines, were player Dennis Smith. Smith was a highly recruited high school player. He went to North Carolina State. He was one and done, and now he plays for the New York Knicks. Coach Mark Gottfried's name came up in this scandal. He was later fired from NC State and now is at Cal State Northridge. Sean Miller, the head coach at Arizona, he survived the onslaught of having his name mentioned, but he was forced to miss a game during the initial disclosures. Jim Larinaga was mentioned, but there was no lasting effect to him. Mike Krzyzewski of Duke, nobody takes a shot at Coach K, so he was mentioned because his player Wendell Carter from Duke was mentioned as part of this. He played 1 year at Duke. Now he plays for the Chicago Bulls. Rick Pitino, coach at Louisville, was fired as a result of all this. He had previously survived other scandals, but he didn't survive this one. So the question was, does winning cure all, or sometimes does it even catch up with you? And then there was Brian Bowen, who was the Louisville player who was recruited. He got caught up in this. He never enrolled at Louisville and never got to fulfill his college playing dream, and now he plays in Australia. So after this indictment, what happened was, as I say, Houston, and I mean Indy, we have a problem. Everybody in the college basketball world began to panic. So on October 11th, 2017, the Independent Commission on College Basketball was established because, as a final straw, the September indictments raised a concern that the levels of corruption and deception are now at a point that they threaten the very survival of the college game as we know it. NCAA President Mark Emmert, in conjunction with the NCAA Board of Governors and the Division I Board of Directors, charged the Commission with the task to examine critical aspects of a system that is not working. And there was work to be done. The Commission had three specific areas they were looking into. One, the relationship between the NCAA National Office, its members, their student athletes, the coaches, and third parties, including apparel companies, non-scholastic basketball organizations, and athletes, agents, and advisors. Two, the relationship between the NCAA and the NBA, including the challenging effect of the NBA's current age eligibility rule, which created the one-and-done phenomena in men's college basketball, and the creation of the right relationship between the NCAA member institutions and its national office to promote transparency and accountability. Secretary Condoleezza Rice, as I mentioned, was named chair of the commission. She was joined by an illustrious staff, including Mary Sue Coleman, who was the president of American Universities, General Martin Dempsey, retired, Jeremy Foley, who was the athletic director emeritus from the University of Florida, Jeffrey Hathaway, AD from Hofstra, Duke basketball star and NBA star Grant Hill, the Reverend John I. Jenkins, who was the president of Notre Dame, Mike Montgomery, retired basketball coach, David Robinson, famous basketball player from Navy and Hall of Fame basketball player from the San Antonio Spurs, Catherine Ruemmler, former White House counsel, Gene Smith, the AD at Ohio State, and John Thompson III, basketball coach and board of directors for the National Association of Basketball Coaches. These members were appointed to an initial 6-month term and will report to the NCAA board for action at its April 2018 meeting. The commission was charged with gathering information and expert opinions for making a, quote, transformative recommendation on legislation, policies, actions, and structures to protect the integrity of college sports with a focus on Division I men's basketball. From mid-October 2017 through early 2018, the Commission apparently sought the views of stakeholders, including the NBA, the NBAPA, USA Basketball, the NCAA offices and departments, college conferences, ADs, coaches, high school and college players, apparel companies, and several other interested parties. After this study and their process, the Commission found and recommended certain things. In assessing both the challenges and the potential reforms, the Commission accepted as its foundational principle the collegiate model of athletic competition and reaffirmed the NCAA's basic purpose to maintain intercollegiate athletics as an integral part of the educational body and the athlete as an integral part of the student body. They wanted to remove the incentive to cheat, and they reiterated a renewed commitment to getting a college degree as a center point of college athletics. A couple of these points we will return to later in this presentation. So here's what they recommended. They wanted to separate the collegiate path and the professional pathway by ending the one-and-done phenomena of college basketball. One and done is when you graduate from high school, you have to you go and you roll in college, so you play 1 year and then you're free to go to the NBA. That's an NBA rule that you can't play the NBA until you're 1 year removed from graduating from high school. They were going to allow students to test their professional prospects and maintain eligibility if they do not sign a professional contract. So It used to be that the minute you kind of declared that you were going to go pro, that kind of removed a bunch of your eligibility because you usually were talking to an agent about that, and that put your amateur status in doubt. They were going to allow students to receive a meaningful assessment of their professional prospects with the help of these certified agents. They were going to provide resources to make a promise of a college education real. They wanted to establish neutral investigation and adjudication for serious infractions and hold individuals and institutions accountable. They wanted to enact and impose increased core punishments with significant deterrent effects. In other words, they wanted to make it so that if you cheated, you had to pay a substantial price. They wanted to address the non-scholastic basketball and its effect on college basketball by reforming it and making its finances transparent. They wanted to include and enlist the apparel companies in transparency and accountability efforts. In cooperation with its partners, they suggested establishing an NCAA youth development program to help evaluate a player's prospects to play at the next level. They wanted to enact changes in rules governing recruiting and coaches' interaction with recruits and student athletes. And they wanted to add a significant cadre of members to the NCAA Board of Governors. Let's take a little closer look at some of these recommendations. The one and done change. The commission concluded that requiring elite high school athletes to attend college contributes significantly to the corruption of basketball and college institutions, deprives players from earning a living, and fuels complaints that the NCAA is exploiting players. The commission called on the NBA and the NBA Players Association to allow 18-year-olds to go straight to the NBA. This could create a problem because players often overestimate their ability to play at the next level. Only 1.2% of college basketball players make it to the next level, although 59% of those Division I players believe they will play at that next level. The commission rejected the NCAA baseball rule, which means that once you enroll in college, you can't be drafted for 3 years. That's forcing students to stay in school against their desires. They did not recommend any changes to the transfer rules, including the sit-out period if a student decides that he wants to leave and go to play at another school. The deeper dive on some of the deeper look at the recommendations. They recommended letting student athletes test their professional prospects without losing eligibility. This allows players to not guess, but to know if the pros think they are ready to move on. Again, I point out the 1.2% that make it as opposed to the 59% that think they're going to make it. It allowed the assistance, or they were recommending allowing the assistance of certified agents. In other words, developing a strict standard for certification of agents and prescribed time periods allowing agents to interact and advise players. The commission felt that this would allow the underworld surrounding sports agents and the under-the-table payments and the unauthorized, under the rules, contact of player agents with players to come out from under the shadows. And the commission really thought it was important that steps be taken to establishing a fund and commit to paying for completion of an education if a player leaves college after 2 years but wants to return to get his degree. The commission did not believe that the players should be paid, but there is enough money to help them get their degree. They also acknowledged that the name, image, likeness discussion needs to continue. As I said, based on the slide of coach's salary, the fact that there is enough money around to help kids get their degree if they leave seems to be self-evident. They recommended improving the investigative process. They acknowledged that the current system of investigation and enforcement is broken. They wanted to establish 2 rules for rules violations, one for complex cases and one for all others. They recommended a committee of infractions appoint a panel of independent hearing officers. In other words, they didn't want Ohio State judging Michigan or Notre Dame. They probably wouldn't have Ohio State judge Michigan, but they didn't want competitors being judges. So having an independent force to evaluate these infractions. They recommended punishing the wrongdoers. That means after the new panel found a violation, that there would be serious punishment for bad violations and lesser for others. As part of the process, they wanted to require cooperation of the institution, the staff, and the student athlete. This included the coaches, the presidents, and the administrators. They wanted to ensure that the punishments had teeth. They recognized that the penalties actually needed to act as a deterrent. They wanted to increase level 1 violations to allow a 5-year postseason ban, increase the financial penalties, including loss of sharing for postseason play. Again, that's $770 million a year that gets spread out. If you lose some of that, it's a big dent into your budget. They wanted to increase the penalties for a show cause from 5 years to life. Show cause is if a coach gets suspended for a violation, in order for him to be employed again, the school has to make a show cause request to let the coach get back in, and usually that's a 5-year show cause time period. They wanted to make it for life, and they wanted to allow penalties from coaches to be greater than 1 year, and they wanted to they suggested providing increased recruiting penalties. In other words, they wanted to make the risk much greater than the reward. They recommended that the NCAA enforce existing requirements and impose additional prerequisites for certification of non-scholastic basketball events. This certification must include detailed requirements for financial transparency. These non-scholastic basketball events are all around the country. They start with kids playing in 3rd, 4th, and go up to probably their junior year. This is the beginning of the toxic money trail. They wanted to reform the interaction with the apparel companies. This is the source of the money that goes into these non-scholastic programs. They wanted to establish youth development programs. And they wanted to amend the rules on recruiting. That was a suggestion of the National Basketball Associations. And that included expanding summer recruiting and skill camps. The commission thought it was important that there be more public members, that more public members. That means people outside of the NCAA world, not people on the NCAA staff, not people in the college world, but people like Condoleezza Rice that were not in the athletic world of a program. They thought that these people brought experience, stature, and objectivity to assist the NCAA in reestablishing itself as an effective and respected leader and regulator of college athletics. And one of those public members should be on the NCAA executive board. They believe that these public members would provide objectivity, fresh perspective, and independent viewpoints and judgments. Addition of the public members would require an amendment to the NCAA Constitution. After the report came in, the NCAA at its April 2018 meeting decided they were going to adopt certain of the recommendations. So the report came back, and the NCAA announced that it agreed upon these changes. In broad terms, the member institutions wanted to provide, and I underline this for emphasis, freedom and flexibility, minimize the leverage of harmful outside influences, make the investigative and infraction process more efficient, set stronger penalties, include independent investigators and decision makers, and add more public voices. So the NCAA bought into a lot of the Commission's recommendations. The specifics of the change. They wanted some flexibility for going pro and getting a degree. That allowed more freedom from deciding to go pro and providing financial assistance so that a player who went pro and maybe didn't make it or maybe he did make it could come back and get his degree. And that included, as part of recruiting, more campus visits, assistant evaluations to go pro, and agent certification. They wanted to reduce the leverage of outside influences on recruits and student athletes. This included the certification of youth basketball events, recruiting calendar changes, increased reporting on outside income. They planned discussions with apparel companies on accountability and transparency in youth basketball. They adopted changes for a more binding and enforcement system. Presidents and athletic directors must more fully cooperate in investigations and infraction process and can work together with the NCAA in an appropriate resolution of any charge. They adopted changes of stronger accountability and penalties. To defer future violations, president, coaches, and staff would have a stronger, clearer accountability expectations and face increased penalties if they break the rules. Changes included stronger president and chancellor accountability by making them personally accountable for their athletic program. Breaking rules resulted in severe and stronger penalties. They adopted creating independent investigators and decision makers on violation cases. And this was, as I talked about earlier, was to prevent the conflict of interest of having one school judging another. And they wanted to create an independent and accountability oversight committee to oversee the entire independent enforcement and infraction process. Most of these independent investigative changes are going to take place starting August of 2019. As I said, they wanted to create an infraction and referral committee. They wanted to create a complex case unit. This was a group of independent investigators that have no conference or school affiliation and shall include violations of core NCAA violations, investigations with stale or incomplete facts, cases with adversarial posturing or refusal to cooperate, cases with breaches of confidentiality or with other pressures that are driving institutional decision makers would all be considered complex cases. To review complex cases, they would come up with an independent resolution panel of 15 members, and 5 of those 15 would hear these complex cases. They agreed that adding 5 public members not affiliated with the NCAA or member clubs would join the NCAA Board of Governors. One of those public members, voted annually by the members, would serve up to 3 years, and all others would serve longer than any school representative. Even though they adopted some of the changes, some of them couldn't take effect right away. First of all, the NCAA, NBA, and NBA National Basketball Players Association must come together and deal with the one-and-done issue. The one-and-done issue was something that was collectively bargained between the Players Association and the NBA. The NCAA really just felt the effects of it, although they weren't part of the discussions. At least they claimed they weren't part of the discussion. All the stakeholders must come up with an agreement with the apparel companies and their role in college basketball. They still need to sit down with a group of agents and clarify the role of the agents in this whole process. They still need to deal with the issue of using college names, college players' names, images, and likeness, and who shares in the profits from those. And they needed to change the NCAA Constitution to allow public members. As I said, there's still a lot of work to be done. When you are talking about $1 billion television contract, full stadiums, this sport is driven by money. Everyone is making money, but for the student athlete, and in some instances, even the college program. How do we make sure that the college athlete is getting an education? What can be done to make him a real part of the educational experience? Can we reduce games and travel? Or is there just an inherent conflict with money and the educational experience? We need to examine the transfer rules. The committee nor the NCAA board did not address or seriously look at changing a student athlete's ability to move to another school without a penalty. Not everyone thought the changes were all that great, either by the committee or the NCAA. When several people didn't think the changes went far enough. They kicked the can down the road on the one and done conversation and compensation for college athletes. They did not engage in any meaningful discussion with the apparel companies, the NBA and or the NBA Players Association, or with non-scholastic basketball entities. In other words, they didn't really have a whole bunch of conversations about solutions with the stakeholders. And they approached the task timidly, therefore unable to make, as they wanted to going into it, transformative recommendations. And more specifically, in my opinion, they did not address the student education and what they said was the centerpiece of college athletics. The NCAA faced criticism as well. Again, as I mentioned, they didn't really address the bona fide educational opportunities and equitable economic rights, whether student athletes should be paid. They didn't address the transfer rule in any meaningful way. They didn't put any urgency into the name, likeness, and image question. And as I said, they didn't really have meaningful conversations with the other stakeholders, the NBA, the apparel companies, and some of the non-scholastic programs. So what would I do if I was in charge? Well, I would let me change that here. I would make sure that the institution has control over their athletic program. I would define a chain of command from the president to the AD to the coach. I would remove from the purview of the coach all compliance protocols and people responsible for such protocols. I would establish written policies, rules, and protocols. And I would review them, if not annually, at least biannually. I would make sure that your contracts reflect the new reality of compliance and transparency. And many of the contracts I have done and seen, those are in most of them, where that is a reason for immediate dismissal with cause, which would be violating NCAA rules. And I would avoid hiring people that have rule violation baggage. So I believe in second chances, but if you're coming to something with a lot of baggage, you're just asking to give your school in trouble. As an institution, I would make sure that there's an independent compliance officer. Again, I would create the protocols for reporting violations. I would, if necessary, if there was a problem, I would consider a complete objective internal investigation using outside assistance. I would go review whatever internal policies that we had. I would draft and make clear the policies for employee discipline so you know what the consequences are if you break a rule. I would provide a disclosure protocol so that there's a whistleblower program with no retaliation. And more importantly, I would never attempt a cover-up, which is always worse than the crime. So at that point, I hope that kind of gave you a walkthrough of where we were when this scandal broke, what people tried to do in looking at it, what they adopted, and how far we have to go, and then some recommendations that we can look. Do we have any questions there, Katie?
Yep. Hi, Bob. We do have a few questions. And before we jump into that, I do want to say I went to UNC Chapel Hill for undergrad, and I'm a huge Roy Williams fan. I even have a T-shirt that says, "You're my boy, Roy." So I was very glad to. I'm very glad we got to mention their most recent national championship in your presentation.
Well, Katie, I'm not sure you want to bring up North Carolina. They've gone through some trouble with some of their academic problems at the University of North Carolina and their student athletes. So I mean,
we're not proud of that.
Right, even the great schools have had some problems.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It does affect all schools, and you're right. I will put my tail between my legs.
Sorry about that.
No, I'm just kidding. Before we move on to questions, which will be great, I do want to just mention really quickly a couple more resources. We do have a blog for our higher ed practice. It's called Reducation, so feel free to check that out. It goes way back, tons of resources, and it also kind of shows you the breadth of our higher ed practice. And you can see some of the other attorneys practicing in our group and some of the interesting things that they do or ways they might be able to help you. Also, I did mention at the beginning that we do host these webinars regularly, and they are on demand. So if there's a topic that we have covered before and you want to check it out, feel free to click on those links for those webinars on demand. So Bob, thank you so much. I will move into some of the questions now, but here's Bob's contact information if you need it. And of course, you can find any of the rest of us on the Thompson-Coburn website or in a couple other places in this slideshow. So feel free to reach out. And you can continue to send in questions, but I'm going to go ahead and get started with some of the ones we've received. So Bob, let's see. First one, will these rule changes in basketball have an effect on other collegiate sports?
Yeah, I think they will. I think, a lot of, for instance, most of the college football is, again, they don't have a one and done. They actually have a three and done. So you have to be graduated for high school from 3 years before the NFL will draft you. Now there are two new leagues that are sprouting up, or actually there are more than two, and there's some discussion in those leagues of whether they will let you come right out of high school or sometime in between the 3 years to play. So that's one rule that's a little different. With the new leagues coming, who knows what will happen. The cost of attendance, that is translated into the other sports, so that if you're a scholar athlete, you get cost of attendance. One of the big things that came from some of these changes were unlimited snacks and all that. So that happens in food. Eventually, when they deal with the names, likeness, and images, that will come across the whole spectrum of college sports.
Okay, fair enough. You mentioned, here's another question. You mentioned the O'Bannon case. Are there other cases that are on the horizon that may impact college sports?
Yeah, O'Bannon had a really big effect on it. It was really a name, image, and likeness case to begin with, and it really became. There was some of the changes in college in the rules were a result of O'Bannon with the cost of food. There are two other cases, or really one other case, that I think will be worth following, and that is the Jenkins versus the NCAA, which was brought to see whether the college scholarship and the caps that they put on college scholarships were anti-competitive. And violated the antitrust rules. So I think that'll be a case to really watch, and that's sort of involved with there's another case that they've kind of merged them together, Shawnee Alston versus the NCAA. So I think that'll be a case worth watching, and whether that will change sort of the nature of competition for scholarships. The argument that the plaintiffs' counsel makes in that case is that there's already competition, and instead of the players getting the benefit of it, these schools are competing and attracting by building great facilities, study halls, locker rooms, athletic dormitories for the athletes. So the argument is that there's already competition, but the competition is not affecting the players. So that would be this Jenkins case, which is out in Oakland. I think will be an interesting case to watch.
Yeah, sounds like it, for sure. And those athletic facilities really I would imagine make a big difference when the kids come and check out the schools.
I went to a bunch of the athletic facilities when my son was being recruited, and having worked for the Rams, I had said the Rams facility looked like a high school facility compared to some of these college ones. They were spectacular.
Oh, wow. Well, let's see. I'm sorry. The next one, the one and done rule is at the core of these changes. As of today, it is still in effect. Can you talk about why you think that is, and will it eventually be changed?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. The NBA again. You probably wouldn't be allowed to have a one and done rule or a prohibition against people entering college, entering the pros at any time they want, but for the labor exemption that we have, and so those things are collectively bargained for. So I think there's enough criticism, especially in basketball, about the one and done. I mean, you look at your rival at Duke, Zion Williamson. He seems that he's ready to play pro basketball right away. Why shouldn't he be able to go play pro basketball right away? But he's, because of the agreement between the Players Association and the league, he's unable to. And again, that would be an anti-competitive effect if it wasn't part of a labor exemption. So I think that eventually will change. I think there's so much pressure on college basketball from both sides. One, that it's not fair for the player not to be able to go, and if he can make money and do what he really wants to do, that why shouldn't he be allowed? I think college basketball is somewhat hurt a little bit by it, is that the players are just coming in. Are they really getting an education, or are they just there to play basketball? So the one and done is who's that benefiting by making a kid go to college that he doesn't want to? But from the Players Association point of view, what unions are doing, what their role is to help protect jobs. And if you have a whole influx of new employees coming into the market, that takes away jobs from people who are already there. So that's a balancing act. But I would predict the one and done in basketball will change in the next few years. I think everybody is pointing to that needs to change. Either that or right. It may go the other way, and they may go to the baseball model. But I don't think. I mean, baseball takes so long for you from high school to getting to the major leagues. When basketball, guys like Zion Williamson, LeBron James, they're ready right away.
Yeah. Okay. I have one more here. It says, can schools financially benefit off the names, likenesses, or images of individual players? That's a great question.
There used to be. You used to see a lot more that. You went to You go to Duke right now, and can you buy a Zion Williamson jersey with his name on the back? And what I think he wears number 1 or number 2. I'm not sure right now. And you can't do that anymore. But you could probably buy a number 1 jersey without his name on it. So the NCAA has kind of peeled back the ability to make money off of a player's name, and I mean everybody knows, that number 1 at Duke is Zion Williamson now. Is it fair for them to sell that without him getting any of the benefits? So the NCAA has really kind of, and the schools have kind of scaled back on using those kind of player images to it. But you do see. In many ticket sales things, you see, billboards of a player on a billboard to sell tickets. So it's kind of an interesting dilemma. I'm not sure whether the answer is no, they can't make money off of them, or yes, they can make money off of them. I think it really depends upon how they're doing it.
Right. That makes sense. And nobody should get too attached to the stars. They might head to the NBA right away anyway, right?
Right. They might. Right.
They might. All right. Well, I think that's all the questions we've received. So, sorry.
Yeah,
I got one more.
Yeah, I got one more.
Can you, sorry, Bob, can you speak to how contradictory it is for the NCAA to dispense draconian penalties and the desire to encourage cooperation?
Well, I guess you got to go back in my mind to look at what are you trying to accomplish by these rules? Are you, and again, it goes back to a real discussion in my mind about what is the purpose of college athletics. When we started the conversation and when the commission went back to look and make recommendations, they were saying that the centerpiece of college athletics was to provide an educational opportunity for a college player. I'm not sure that we're accomplishing that in general. If you look at college basketball, for instance, you have teams playing games on Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. They could be in California on Tuesday night, and there's schools in Florida. I don't know how that contributes to an educational experience. I would argue that being on a college campus, being in class, being involved in a conversation in your classroom is as important as studying and reading a book in front of a tutor. That you really develop the opportunity to think on your feet, to think in a classroom, to critically think, and that's in my mind what college is all about. So again, if you accept the premise that the whole idea is that we're there to provide educational opportunities to people, then anybody who is working against that goal should be punished. And if you are part of a college environment, you should have bought into that goal. So you really have to say, if you're going to be part of this system, then you have to be willing to follow the rules, and you have to be willing to cooperate, and so that we can make sure that nobody's cheating, nobody's getting an unfair advantage, and that we are doing what we say we're doing, which is providing educational opportunities to young people. So again, one of the criticisms that I might have had, Katie, and or whoever asked this question about the whole process is did they go far enough in looking at what we were trying to do? I often say that if you try to piecemeal some of these changes when you have so many problems, you're not really getting anything done. Maybe they should have pushed everything in the middle of the table and said, let's look at the whole problem, and let's not say we're going to structure a system based upon what we have. Let's start from scratch and see if there's something that we can do that makes the whole system better. So, one of the things is you have to make the risk greater than the reward, so that if winning a college championship and increasing your visibility and your name recognition and it results in more college applications, if that becomes worth the risk of missing a payment, we can't do that. So, it has to be a deterrent effect, and it has to make so that there's some real penalties, and the only way to really enforce it is to get those people that are part of the system and have bought into the system to be cooperative in it. Okay? I think we are done with questions.
That's great.
Unless you... Right. I think, and
Yeah, I think so. And I just want to remind everyone again to please fill out our little survey. And again, we really welcome ideas for future webinars. Our team here at Thompson is has a really wide breadth, so we would be happy to hit on some new topics and get some new ideas and hear what people want to hear more about. So we welcome those. Again, feel free to reach out to any of us with follow-up questions or comments. And you can see here we've got our last slide, the conditions of use and disclaimer. So feel free to read that. I will let you be your own attorney on that and read that. And we thank you so much for listening in. Bob, thank you so much for sharing all this expertise with us and telling some fun stories. I really love anything related to sports, so I loved learning, doing a deeper dive into this topic. So thank you so much.
And there's a big game tonight.
Yeah.
North Carolina Duke.
That's
big
right.
game tonight.
I will be watching some basketball. I have my
Right.
young children trained to cheer for the Heels, so we'll be doing that too.
Okay. All right.
All
Thank
right.
you, Katie.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for
Take care,
hosting.
everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Sure. Bye.